Okay.
25.
So let me get going with our overview of political parties, and let me just kind of spotlight what happens next is interest groups, and what you see as a theme within the AP test is a compare contrast. So off the top of your head, even though you haven't studied really, you've kind of looked at political parties in terms of your identification. You really haven't looked at interest groups too much yet. What do you think's similar? What do you think they have in common, a political party and an interest group? Think about, like, we can think of certain interest groups like AARP and NRA and the American Medical Association. What do you think's similar?
All right. They both support certain things and they work together.
Okay, so they are kind of both institutions where there's an ideological issue that unifies them. They work collectively on that ideological issue.
Working ideologically on that issue to impact legislation.
So in one of their major goals is to shape policy.
Yeah.
Where that goal goes, whether it's primary or secondary, pay attention to in a second. You know, whether or not that's their primary objective or like, hey, that's nice if it happens. It's kind of funny. So let me use that as the opportunity to look at a contrast. What do you think is different? Kind of is in the area that you're talking about.
Interest groups kind of soak us fully in on one or two like big problems, while a political party has to like look at.
Good. So, well, I'm going to say yes and no, in that you have certain interest groups that are singular issue, but you do have kind of interest groups that tackle a broader spectrum. However, it often is still kind of perhaps more narrow than the party. So like, for example, if you look at the American Medical Association, there's a whole host of issues that they're interested in that, you know, there's medical liability, there's, you know, money for research, there's, you know, the pharmaceutical and drug side, there's helping in low-income areas, because often you're going to see a correlation between low income and health issues. You can kind of really broaden out what they look at, but they're all revolving around health, right, and doctors. So you are going to see some interest groups with a broader spectrum of issues, but I would say you're right, when you go to the party, they go out even broader. What else do you think is different, political parties to interest groups? Come back to what Katie was saying in terms of the ultimate objective. What do you think the ultimate objective of a political party is? They both are kind of ideologically unified.
Pass policy that suits ideology.
For the political party.
For the political party. And then the interest groups, it's in the name, it's interest, right? So they, like the NRA, they want legislation that's going to help keep lax gun laws.
Yeah.
And gun freedom.
So that sounds the same. They both want kind of policy that promotes their interests.
I think political parties also like want power to like.
How do you get power?
Like they want to take over Congress and stuff like that.
So how do you do that?
Getting votes.
Elections.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So, you know, again, I could have done that in a more streamlined fashion, but I think it's kind of important for you guys to think about. So to do it as an anticipatory question. So a political party, if I'm going to look at a formal definition, is a non-governmental institution, and I made that bold and jump off the page. What do I mean non-governmental institution? And you might be kind of having this like, hey, wait a minute moment, right? We're studying government. What is this non-governmental institution?
The people who hold that office are of that party.
Good.
The presidency, for example, is not inherently a political party-based position. It's just a position. The president in that position is in the party.
Okay.
And I said position sometimes.
So what you're kind of describing right now is there are governmental positions. There are governmental institutions. I have a legislative, executive, and judicial branch, and within those branches are a myriad of positions.
Right.
The political parties essentially are something separate from government. They connect you to government. They're a linkage institution.
Okay.
So give me another example of a linkage institution, something that's outside of government but connects you to government.
Media.
The media, right? So you need to kind of remember that the media is a non-governmental institution, just like political parties. They are outside of government, but they connect you to government, right? They're kind of a portal into it. And their primary objective is to elect like-minded candidates. That's the central function. Everything else is secondary. You know, there is this idea of we want like-minded candidates to be elected so that we can affect policy. so that we can give direction to those, those mass government kind of desires. But that's kind of a secondary goal. So let me ask you this way. If a policy was going to hurt their chances of reelection, regardless that the party stands for this, right? Immigration, gun control, environmental policy, pick your issue. And they are, this is one of their bedrock issues, but if they get on the wrong side of this issue, they're going to lose the election. Will they pass the policy regardless? Will they put ideology in front of reelection? No, not really, right? So there's oftentimes that there's certain issues that they won't touch, or they'll think a little more savvy about how to approach that issue, okay? When you look at an interest group, they're first and foremost about the policy. They don't run, does the NRA run a political candidate? Does AARP run a political candidate? No. So they're looking to influence policy, and they will get involved in elections. They will give candidates kind of report cards, and they will give candidates money. Have you seen? You were having a...
No, I just think it's funny.
We're gonna actually, when we look at interest groups, it is literally a report card. They will literally kind of look at where did you stand on these issues? Were you with us, against us? And they might give a percentage. They might say we 90% approve of this, or they literally might give a letter grade. You get an F, you get an A+. So they will do a lot of things to support candidates, but they don't run candidates themselves. Policy comes before candidates, okay? So that's one kind of interesting kind of contrast there, I suppose. Another dichotomy to look at is the nature of political parties versus the nature of our system. The very goal of our system, when you look at Federalist 10, right, is using a big republic to create a lot of factions so they do what? Cancel each other out. I want to basically diffuse power. That's why we have 3 branches. That's why we have a bicameral legislature. That's why we have a federal system, right? Where there's federal, state, and local. The whole idea is to avoid a concentration of power because why? Come back to power.
Power corrupts,
Yeah.
absolute power.
So when you
corrupts.
concentrate power, it leads to, kind of corruption. What's the goal of a political party?
Get as much
Focus
votes.
power.
To consolidate power, right? So the goal of our system is to essentially diffuse. The goal of a political party is to consolidate, right? So again, there's another kind of conundrum to look at. So if this institution is kind of the antithesis of our political system, why have it? Well, there's a lot of valid reasons to have it. First and foremost, it organizes our election process and our political system, right? Again, it's really interesting in that you have national offices where candidates run for that national office on a state-by-state basis using party as a label. So all 3, again, have a say in that process. And they play kind of an important role. So what does the party do? Well, they help nominate a candidate and they help win elections, in part by finding the candidates in the first place. You're gonna see a lot of ways that as you guys just started to explore what was on the web, there's a lot of ways that all of a sudden you can get involved if you're interested, right? So they will, and it's not just like support by voting, it's support by like getting out there. Come volunteer, whether it's on a phone bank or canvassing a neighborhood or maybe kind of doing the next level as you work up through a party. Maybe there's literally, you're gonna see places where you could decide, hey, maybe I'm gonna run for something. That's been an interesting kind of phenomenon with politics recently. The Me Too movement, in part. The women, I think, are beginning to really strongly identify political power, and a big number of women are beginning to run for
It's
office.
double what it was last year.
Yeah, and in some cases, really, there's almost poetry to some of the places that they're deciding to run to challenge where they had faced state discrimination. So there's some great examples of that. At any rate, you're going to see that they help select and recruit candidates. They'll raise money. They'll give administrative support, and by that I mean the party helps develop a ground game. They help develop the or identify and use the technology that's going to help you win. It's both. It's low tech and high tech that wins you an election, right? Political parties are important because, you know, if we don't have them, then we don't have anything remotely close to the pluralist theory. There's a lot of states that are heavily red or blue. And that's not democracy, is it, entirely? If you're going to be a democracy, you want at least, I want 2 competitive parties. I always want them as an option. I'm beginning to increasingly think I want 3, if not 4. That has literally been my kind of political evolution over the last, you know, 2 years, watching kind of the gridlock that happens and the hyper-partisanship that happens. I'm starting to lean to the idea of like a tiebreaker. You need at least 2, if not more, in my opinion. And they also simplify the voting process. Remember, we like simple. You guys started to, did you feel when you were looking at the websites that you could have been there for months? I mean, how many issues?
All of them.
All of them. How complex is finding the nuanced reasons to support or oppose an issue, right? You could spend a kind of, people when they go into policy, they pick just one. And they make a lifetime of kind of studying that one issue, and then they make it really complicated. That's how they get paid well, right? That you need an expert to understand this issue. And you're expected on some level to vote based on all those issues. God, that's hard. You did it especially, right? You just picked a label. Party, right? I'm this, and it simplifies things. On some level, if you do the initial research, it's meaningful. You have a reason for why you feel like you do, but you let the party kind of in the, its underlying philosophy be your guide, right? Okay, so why else have it? Well, that's to kind of get elected. You also need parties as a source of kind of unity and stability. Again, we want to diffuse power, but if we want to get anything done, you need a coalition. And this is a way to kind of pull people together. It's one thing to get elected, but if you're going to stay elected, you do need to, this is kind of funny, like I just told you, they put policy secondary to elections, but elections depend a little bit on getting some things done. If you don't deliver, you're not likely to continue to get long-term support unless you just can't stomach the alternative. You know, anybody but a liberal, anybody but a conservative.
UGB does.
Do you think maybe though that like a 3rd or like 4th party would make the voting process like more difficult? 'Cause
Yes.
Like, it's not just like, oh, it's this or that, like it's not as black and white. kind of.
On some level. Typically, 3rd parties are on a single issue, and that might simplify things because this is the most important issue, but then how do you govern if you're a single issue kind of party? Who do you pull to kind of get policy done? And I think there is basically an idea, and we're gonna look at this more as we go along. If I support this 3rd party and it's not very viable, I might as well just, you know, pitch my vote out the window. So, you know, unless there's some way to kind of broaden out what 3rd parties stand for and begin to make government more dependent on coalitions, right now, neither side will compromise, basically, right? Occasionally they'll find grounds to do a little horse trading, but by and large, it's either you get it done with your majority or you don't get it done because the other side's gonna block you with their cloture-proof, filibuster kind of, technique. So maybe the 3rd party has to, can kind of be a group that brokers it, but you'd need to change more than that within our electoral system, and good luck changing our electoral system. Because I already pointed out that's damn near impossible. Sorry to, like just kind of like bum you out on these things, but again,
It's just the reality.
you guys are getting more things done than the adults, so maybe we need to put you in charge. Go ahead.
Would you say like, cause like the Libertarian Party, like are they a multi-issue party? Like would they be a good candidate for a 3rd party?
They're
Or are they more of an ideological?
They're ideologically driven, but you can use that formula to figure out where they stand on the issue, which is always less is more. The idea of taking a free market approach to not only economics, but almost everything else.
Right. Not knowing how level is?
Well, in part, we can, satirize the candidate because he didn't have a sophistication with foreign policy, but in part of their idea is like, what are we doing other places anyways?
Right.
Less is more. So I don't know if I'd call them multi-issue, but I would say you can use their ideological approach to figure out where they stand on most issues.
Okay.
All right, so again, the parties do form a kind of common basis for cooperation. What I gave you is like, okay, the youth vote is largely kind of Democratic. Older people tend to vote and identify as Republican. People of color tend to vote Democratic. And white and more affluent tend to vote Republican. That becomes a common basis not just to get elected, but to govern. You need to govern with coalitions, and occasionally they can get things done. What happens is, again, party identification is a strong cue as to how elected officials will vote. They tend to vote with their party 80 to 90% of the time. If they have a majority, and again, if they're able to pull the right numbers, again, we really did study how the Senate is the Senate. You need 60 to get legislation done there. And again, I do think that that's appropriate. I think if you can't get an overwhelming consensus for something, and 60% being an overwhelming consensus, maybe that's not a good policy idea. Provided you're not letting hyper-partisanship decide like where you are. You know, hopefully they look at it in terms of the issue and they find, you know, we're gonna give you this to this side, we'll build a wall, but we're also gonna give access to the dreamers to getting citizenship. That's some horse trading. And if you do that and you get your 60%, then maybe that's good policy. So, you know, parties are a way to occasionally get things done because that's how people, you know, vote and identify. And they know they need to deliver. You know, I've got this kind of, you know, this chart in here because I do think it's kind of interesting to look at, and we're gonna look at this more and more, that again, in terms of how people identify, it's a small percent that identify themselves as Democratic or Republican, right? I think it's 26 and 23%. 26 Democratic, 23 Republican. The vast majority lean. But they lean in a particular direction, and then that's the kind of the cue to governing, right? This was an interesting chart because it just shows you again, I think, as to how hyper-partisan we are. You know, as you look at the other presidents, if there is a Democratic president, they may poll really low with the Republicans, but they haven't cratered, right? And you know, again, you're going to see mid-range kind of support by the people that self-identify as independent. Right now, man, are we hyper-partisan. Republicans, and this was an older poll, but the numbers really hold up still. You know, 84% of the Republicans approve of the job that Trump is doing. 8% of the Democrats do. Holy cow, are we partisan. All right, this is where it gets a little Byzantine, a little tricky. And I don't see a lot of like hyper detailed questions on this. You just ought to know the rule of thumb. And the rule of we have to look at the structure of the party. How do they kind of, we've got these ideological ideas that we support. How do we begin to kind of go through the process of identifying and recruiting and running candidates that are going to promote our ideology, right? How do we do that? Well, it's the rule, and this is what you need to remember, really, is it's bottom up. A political party is non-hierarchical. It's pretty fragmented. And really the flow of power goes kind of from the bottom up. You start with local party organizations. And you start with the smallest kind of geographic entity, and that would be a precinct, all right? So that's the kind of the smallest entity that we have. You know, the chapter will refer to it as a fundamental building block of the party. What a precinct is literally kind of a little geographic blob. It's a series of kind of adjacent neighborhoods, typically.
So national, state,
yeah, I'll show you.
precinct?
Yep, so the way it kind of goes is you start with the precinct, and then you kind of build up for there, because that was just showing you the three logical ones, right? Like you've got a precinct, and then you've got a congressional district, and then you go state, and then you go national. Well, there's wards, there's cities, there's towns, there's counties. There's essentially what they try to do is divide and conquer. Let's kind of create a geographically manageable section that a precinct kind of commander, a ward kind of commander can motivate politically. You know, they're gonna go canvass, they're gonna go knock on doors, they're gonna hold meetings. You're gonna see it all here in a second. But they basically try to, like, you know, create some sort of cohesive geographic little spot that they can organize, and then you build from there. Your wards meet with your precincts meet with your state level. The state level then coordinates with the federal level. but it all flows bottom up.
Do you think you could possibly, do you think the data's out there for like, I know like the last election you can see it on the county level, would it be possible to see it on the precinct level? Or is that
See, like the voting trends?
yeah. Is that
They
maybe,
can
like-
break it down, yes. If not, you're not necessarily gonna see it on a lot of the site maps that I have here. But the party itself has that internal data.
Right, I kinda wanna see if I can find that.
Can I just use a map?
Sure. So, again, this is a way to kind of simplify it, to kind of get you to think about, again, it's decentralized and it goes bottom up. But, you know, this is kind of maybe amusing for you, that, you know, it again starts small and it starts local. If you guys want impact, it's easier than you think. So, you know, Georgetown has a Democratic ward chair. Paul Nelson, at least recently. I don't know if he's changed since. You can email him if you're interested, right, or call him. I mean, he's put himself out there, right? At 4 Tall Tree Way. I didn't even know that was a street in town. That must be one of those new developments, right?
Anybody know where that
Where they
is?
cut down the trees to make the development, is that?
Oh, yeah. They
Get
cut
the
down
idea?
all the tall
Probably.
trees.
I could, yeah.
All right, for the Republicans,
Trees
it's
in
Ann
the way.
Tintendo.
Yep.
Mark Tintendo's mother, I believe. I taught Mark. And she was smarter. She kind of, you know, kept her contact info there, so you can't harangue and harass her. So literally, local people that you know, maybe if you recognize the names, are the local kind of ward chairs. And they begin the kind of the process of organizing the ward, which in turn eventually kind of coordinates with the state as you build up. So, you know, the state kind of does a lot of the same functions that I talked about in terms of, you know, raising money, finding candidates, organizing the strategy, hitting the ground to kind of help those candidates win. And again, just keep in mind that their programs and plans are autonomous. It essentially, you know, it goes state up. What'd you find?
So I looked it up and I found, although I can't seem to open it up on my phone, but on citylab.com someone has created, a cartographer,
Yeah.
has created a map showing pretty much every precinct's voting record.
This is, again, if you want to know how to control politics, it's in the nitty-gritty, right? So, see if you, Colby, take that in for a second. It's in the nitty-gritty that you
Yeah.
control politics. It's literally in that data. It's literally door by door by door, kind of knowing where people are and where they stand, and using, again, like a ground game and technology to try to move them.
Yeah, like just looking at the map, like most of this map, like on the precinct map, most of that map is red.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
But, again, there's strategies to do it, and it's in knowing the Byzantine details of like, how is the party structured?
Right.
So that I can use those rules to my advantage to shape the party and move the party, right? Again, the nice thing about our system is it is, again, a federal system. So because the parties go ground up, a state party might have, as you guys were looking at those sites, state party might have slightly different issues that it pushes because it's more responsive to the states. So, again, you know, the wards have their own kind of leadership. The states have their own leadership here. And, you know, again, figuring out how to eventually become a person that is involved on the state level, probably not as hard as you want. How many people have the time and the inclination to do this, right? The drive to do this. And you gotta sit through a meeting that has, you know, again, to make it a little more tangible for you, you're never gonna get quizzed on this kind of stuff.
Right, as you get
But-
refreshments at 6
but-
p.m.
Yeah, but what do they look at? You know, okay, so they're meeting at a local high school. You know, they've got some refreshments, and then at 7 o'clock they start, and they just grind through business. They'll, you know, hear the minutes of the previous meeting, and they'll look at their finances and their bylaws, and then they'll begin to kind of plan upcoming events and things like that. You can literally kind of begin to because there's people that will take minutes of these meetings. And, you know, so in this one, I just kind of pulled out, okay, there's a vacancy for a position and we need to kind of fill it, what we're gonna do. And they literally put stuff in the newspaper, not that anybody reads that anymore, right? But they'll put an ad in a local newspaper, and then they'll, you know, try to coordinate with the local, you know, some sort of media outlet, radio, TV, whatever, and then they will use Facebook. You know, they're not quite on, no Instagram there or whatever the cooler one is, but they'll use that. And then here's the Democrats, and it just kind of like, it's interesting. Look at the They're emphasizing kind of making sure that we represent diverse people within our meetings. So we've got an LGBT subcommittee reporting in, a Muslim voter registration project going on, and we're reporting on that. Guy making sure that when we talk about Social Security, we call it that's not welfare, that's not where you're getting a handout, that's an earned benefit, right? So it's in the nitty-gritty that you begin to see how you could have an impact, but it starts kind of small and it starts local, right? Again, this is state level. This might look a little different than what you guys looked at when you looked at the national level, because maybe business and economic growth is different in terms of what we'd emphasize for Massachusetts. We're a biomedical and technology corridor. You know, so maybe we've got a different kind of plan to emphasize our economic interests. Here is a way that you literally could decide, hey, I want to run for office.
hello.
Uh-oh, lost Angela for a second.
Oh no,
We're good.
we're good. Sorry. Ann.
Slightly earthquake, there we go. Tell me about yourself. I don't know how many character limits that is, but you literally start filling yourself out, and if, you know, they're looking for, you know, in Massachusetts in particular too, it's, a lot of people might not run in certain races because they're convinced it's a democratic state and therefore what are my chances, and they're often anxious to find somebody who could be a viable challenger. Here's other ways that you can get involved. You could be a grassroots communicator. We'll talk about what that is more so with our interest group unit, but that literally is this non-hierarchical kind of bottom-up movement where you all become lobbyists essentially, and you all, you know, go and recruit people, and you become the expert on it. You know, whether it's through email or writing letters to the editor or posting on blogs or calling a local radio show. Anybody listening to local radio? Show up on the Community Access Network. Use social media, and then again, it all builds to the national committee. Really their job is to kind of take everything that's coming from the bottom up and create that party platform. You know, this is what we're getting as a push from the wards and the states, and this is our platform, literally the thing that we stand on. You know, you read a lot of those goals. It's our core values, it's what we say that we're going to do. And they will try to find those national candidates as well. So just like the state is finding state candidates, the national party is finding you know, their national candidates. There's faces that lead these groups, and again, control of a party and political destiny is in the nitty-gritty details. I don't know if you know who that is.
Back to that Commerce Press.
Yep.
Press.
So he is the new head of the DNC. There's their platform.
Yeah,
So
that
hopefully
was-
what you guys looked
I
at
read
is akin
through
to
that.
that.
That was.
Look at it. I mean, look at it in terms of its.
Yeah, same way there.
Here is the head of the RNC. If the first name of a hyphenated name rings a bell, that is the daughter of Mitt Romney, right? So she's the head of the RNC, and that hopefully was your access point into the GOP and their platform. And ultimately what, again, the party does is they come up with the platform, they support the national candidate. You know campaigns and elections, you guys studied that. And ultimately we go from the primaries to, I have this for you tomorrow. One of their major objectives is to organize the national convention. Okay, so we'll look at that tomorrow.